The sun hung high and heavy in the sky, scorching the earth below. It was the kind of heat that made the air shimmer, blurring the lines between reality and mirage. In the distance, the small town of Bitter Creek lay nestled against the dusty hills, its streets deserted save for a few curious onlookers peering from behind half-drawn curtains. They all knew what was coming. Every man, woman, and child had heard the name of Doc Calhoun and Red McCleary. Today, Bitter Creek would be the stage for their final duel. Around the campfire, old Hank's eyes narrowed as he leaned in closer, his voice lowering to a near whisper, the flames flickering in time with his words. Two men, he began, both as different as night and day, but bound by one thing, pride. And out here, pride's a dangerous thing. Doc Calhoun and Red McCleary had been enemies for years, but the time for words was over. Now, it was just them and the dust beneath their boots. The tale of Doc Calhoun and Red McCleary. The rivalry between Doc Calhoun and Red McCleary was the stuff of legend. Doc was a man of intellect, known for his calm demeanor and his love for strategy as much as his skill with a revolver. He wasn't just fast, he was clever. Red, on the other hand, was pure fire and fury. Brash, bold, and dangerous, he lived for the thrill of the duel, his quick temper matched only by his even quicker draw. The town of Bitter Creek had been caught in the middle of their feud for years. It was here, in the dusty streets lined with crooked buildings and saloons, that their paths had crossed one too many times. And today, there would be no backing down. The townsfolk, too frightened to intervene, could only watch from their windows as the two men prepared for the showdown. It was high noon when Doc Calhoun stepped into the street, his boots kicking up little clouds of dust with each deliberate step. He moved slowly, deliberately, his hand hovering just above the well-worn grip of his Colt. His eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned the horizon, but his mind was elsewhere, already considering the duel, already weighing his options. From the opposite end of the street, Red McCleary sauntered out of the saloon, a crooked grin twisting his lips. His hands were loose by his sides, the sun glinting off the revolver strapped to his hip. He moved with a cocky confidence, the kind of swagger that came from winning too many duels and believing himself invincible. "You ready to finish this, Calhoun?" Red called out, his voice dripping with arrogance. Doc didn't respond. He didn't have to. He'd faced men like Red before, men who thought speed was everything, who thought that the only way to win was to be faster than the other man. But Doc knew better. This wasn't just about speed. It was about strategy, about outthinking the opponent before the guns were even drawn. The two men squared off, their eyes locked in a silent standoff as the sun beat down on them. The tension was thick in the air, palpable, like the final moments before a storm. The duel. As the wind picked up, swirling the dust between them, Doc's mind raced. He could feel the weight of his revolver, could picture the exact moment when Red would make his move. But something didn't sit right with him. He knew Red's reputation, knew the man lived for this kind of moment. Red would expect him to draw fast, to make the first move. But Doc wasn't about to play Red's game. Doc's fingers twitched by his side, and for a split second, the whole town seemed to hold its breath. Then, Red's hand moved. It was a blur of motion, too fast for the eye to follow, but before he could draw his gun, Doc did something unexpected. He spoke. "You ever wonder," Doc said calmly, his voice cutting through the silence, "why you're always looking over your shoulder, Red?" Red hesitated, his hand faltering just inches from his gun. The words had caught him off guard. It wasn't what he'd expected, and in that moment of confusion, his speed didn't matter. "You think being the fastest gun in the West makes you untouchable," Doc continued, his hand never leaving his side, "but I've seen men like you before. You're a man who thinks pride's more important than anything else. More important than life itself." Red's grin faltered, his eyes narrowing as he tried to make sense of Doc's words. "What are you talking about, Calhoun?" Doc took a step forward, his posture relaxed, but his gaze never leaving Red's face. "Pride's a dangerous thing, Red. And it's gonna get you killed one day. Not because someone's faster than you, but because you'll make a mistake. And when you do, it'll be the last thing you ever do." The words hung in the air, sinking into the dust like lead. Red, rattled but unwilling to back down, made a snap decision. His hand shot toward his gun again, but this time, it wasn't speed that decided the outcome, it was Doc's calm. Before Red could even draw, Doc's voice rang out once more. "You don't have to do this, Red." And just like that, Red stopped. The silence was deafening. The townsfolk who had been watching from behind their curtains leaned in closer, their eyes wide with disbelief. Red McCleary, the fastest gun in Bitter Creek, stood frozen, his hand still hovering over his revolver. Doc didn't move, didn't need to. He had one without ever drawing his weapon. Red's pride had been his undoing. The realization washed over Red's face as he slowly lowered his hand, the fire in his eyes dimming. He had been outwitted, not outgunned, and that stung more than any bullet ever could. Old Hank leaned back, his voice softening as he spoke the final words of the tale. Red walked away that day, beaten not by a bullet, but by his own pride. Some say he left Bitter Creek and never looked back. Others reckon he wandered the desert, searching for something that would make him feel whole again. The fire crackled, and the listeners around the campfire exchanged glances, pondering the lesson hidden in the story. "Pride's a funny thing," Hank continued, his gaze fixed on the flames. "It'll push a man to do things he'll regret. And sometimes, all it takes is a few well-placed words to remind him what really matters." The desert wind picked up, carrying the last embers of the fire into the night sky. Hank's voice lowered to a near whisper. "In the end, it ain't always about who's the fastest. Sometimes, it's about who's the wisest." The travelers nodded slowly, the weight of the tale settling over them like the desert dust. Old Hank smiled to himself as he leaned back, knowing that his story had done more than entertain, it had made them think. And out here in the Wild West, that was sometimes more important than anything else.